Greetings. Been a while since I made a DCS video. This is just going to be sort of my, not necessarily first impressions of the Apache, as I've been flying it for the past few days and have quite a few hours with it, but sort of my early impressions, I guess you could say. In terms of complexity, I think the aircraft is relatively simple. There's definitely a bit of MFD page hunting for various things, but once you know where it's at, it's pretty basic. And aircraft startup is really quite quick, other than waiting for the navigation system to align. In fact, a lot of the startup is just kind of sitting around and waiting for that to occur. I haven't timed it, but I think it's like 4 or 5 minutes, and the aircraft takes about, I don't know, 60 seconds to actually start up. So there's a lot of just sitting around trying to figure out how to consume that time. Typically what I do is I'll do things like set up communications, get all my countermeasures set up, anything like that. The actual startup itself can pretty much be summarized as turn on battery, turn on APU, press the Doppler button on the appropriate MFD page to start aligning the navigation, start engine 1 and 2, align your helmet-mounted sight, and twiddle your thumb for the next few minutes. Oh, turn off the APU before you take off. Doesn't hurt anything if you don't, but, you know, the bitching Betty will complain. In terms of flying it, it's a very nimble helicopter, but it also comes off as a bit underpowered. And you can see here I can pretty easily maneuver through the city. A little higher up, but you'll see later in the video I drop down. This is a track recording. Incidentally, tracks are working again, so yay for that. But the Apache is very nimble, certainly much more maneuverable than the Hind, although not as much as the Hokum. However, as said, it is kind of underpowered, so during forward flight there's not really an issue, but if you're in a hover or going into a hover or trying to take off, it's definitely underpowered. There's just no way around it. It's not like the Hind where you can just take off like a bat out of hell, or the KA-50. It's just this thing with a full, we'll call it the World War III load, which is of course what everyone at DCS is always going to run with. It can barely get off the ground, and you really can't fire from a hover that way because you'll just fall out of the sky as soon as you stop moving. So, and even with a lighter load, say, you know, a half load of Hellfire, say like 8 or something, it's still pretty sluggish. So, although I think all of us were looking forward to doing little games of peekaboo behind buildings and such, the reality is the aircraft just doesn't have the power, even at sea level, here on the Caucasus map. So in this mission, I end up flying it more like I do the Hind. Now, in terms of weaponry, of course, it can carry 16 Hellfire missiles, although, as said, you take a bit of a performance hit with that. But on paper, I think they have a range of 10 kilometers, but unfortunately the AI gunner can only hit targets out to about 5, sometimes 6 kilometers. So, although the missiles have the range, you can't really use it unless you have a human gunner. And unfortunately, there isn't any kind of auto-tracking implemented yet. I think the real aircraft has that, but it's not implemented in DCS, as far as I know. And so much like the Hind, you have to manually keep the designator on the target and laze it all the way through, which once again greatly affects the accuracy and the max range at which you can use these weapons. The end result is it's very Hind-ish in terms of weapons employment at this time. Now, in the future, once we get the fire control radar implemented and I think these other tracking systems implemented, it'll probably be much better, but right now in this initial early access, it's pretty limited in terms of accuracy and the ability to fire either from a hover or on the move. It's certainly limited into weapon range. Effective range, that is. The gun is definitely fun. However, it's not very accurate. You know, it's very much an area of effect weapon. If you have a whole bunch of infantry kind of in a pile, you can hit them. But if you're trying to shoot like an individual vehicle, you will fire an awful lot of rounds to not actually hit anything. The sensors on it are very, very good. It of course has FLIR, it has TV, it has the helmet mounted sight, it has a very good radar warning receiver, it has a missile warning system, although it does not have a laser warning system, so that is definitely a miss. I have taken a few hits from ATGMs from T-80s and such without knowing they were coming. Which is another reason to actually fly it like the Hind, because in DCS, if you're moving above, I believe it's about 50 or 60, maybe it's 100 kilometers an hour, the tanks won't actually shoot at you with their main gun. One thing you may notice here as I cruise along the beach here is that I'm only doing about 125, 130 knots. And that's actually kind of slow. That's only about 220, 240 kilometers an hour. So you're a good 60 to 80 kilometers an hour slower than either the KA-50 or the Hind. And in some dogfight type missions with it, I have run into a problem where I can't get away from a Hind or a KA-50. They will just run you down, and there's nothing you can really do about it. You are more maneuverable. You do have a, you know, a fancy nose turret gun, but it's so inaccurate that hitting a flying target is borderline impossible outside of about 100 meters. Maybe that'll come with practice, I don't know, but at this time I haven't had very good luck with it. One thing I have noticed is that it's very difficult to get the bot gunner to actually shoot. I think you just saw there, I had to give him the command to fire like 2, 3, maybe 4 times, and that's pretty consistent. It seems like the first one is always ignored. Sometimes the second one is ignored, and sometimes he just won't shoot no matter what you do. You put the target right on the nose, be perfectly aligned, and he just won't do anything. So, far less reliable than Petrovich and the Hind, but once again, this may just be a an early access issue, although technically the Hind is also early access. So he may need some work. I have noticed he will not fire beyond about 6 kilometers. As I said, you can't really hit anything beyond 6 kilometers anyways, but he won't even attempt it for the most part. I think the longest I've seen him fire was maybe 6.1. Countermeasures on the aircraft are pretty good. You get 60 flares, 30 chaff. It has programs, allegedly. I haven't even tried using them. I just used the manual bypass mode. It works pretty well, but I definitely missed the 120 plus flares of things like the Hokum and the Hind, where you can just have them just dropping a pair of flares every second or two for several minutes at a time. Those definitely favor pre-flaring, whereas the Apache here is sort of a after-the-fact flaring, which is certainly more dangerous. Although, as said, it does have a missile warning system. Flying it at night is certainly interesting, because you have the monocle here can have the aircraft's night vision system fed through it, which is interesting. I'm not sure I like it. And it's not because the image quality is poor, it's instead because the sensor is actually on the nose of the aircraft, and so it's really weird where if you have a light source and you can see it with your left eye and you view it with your right eye, like, it is way out there. Like it's as if you have 10 feet between your eyeballs, or maybe 20 feet. It's pretty far, and it just skews your perception. So I don't know. It doesn't give me a headache. I've heard some people get headaches from it. It doesn't really bother me. It's weird and disorienting, I find. And here you can see I'm wobbling around quite a bit while trying to more or less hover in a pop-up. And that is one thing, is the aircraft is very wobbly at low speed. I should mention the autopilot systems. You would think the Apache would have a fairly advanced autopilot, but it's actually quite crude. And the trimming system is basically useless for anyone with a non-force feedback joystick, which is basically everyone. I'm not aware of any force feedback sticks that have been produced in the past decade. So I don't even bother trimming it. There's no trim reset. There's no like hat for trim like in the Hind. It's just you press the trim and it trims it there. You press the trim again, it trims it there, and so on. There is an autopilot, but as I said, it's very, very basic. It's basically just altitude and heading hold, that type of stuff. It's not anything you wouldn't have in the Mi-8. In fact, I would say the Mi-8's autopilot is arguably better, but that may just be an early access issue. You can't fly the Apache from the front seat. It is, in fact, possible. In fact, if you want to do absolutely everything, the front seat is really the only place you can do that. Now, the problem is, being a legacy aircraft that's been continuously upgraded, it has a whole bunch, it just has a hodgepodge of systems. So you start out with what was basically an American Hind in terms of weapon systems, and then it got upgraded over and over and over again. And the systems weren't integrated really at all. And so what you end up with is 4 sticks in the front cockpit and about 5 billion buttons between them. So you have, say, a slew for controlling the cursor on the MFDs, and you have a second one to slew the targeting camera. And although FCR isn't implemented, I think there might be a third one to slew the FCR around. I don't know. So it's wild. There are just so many controls up there. They're completely redundant. There's no logic behind it. Right now we don't have the fire control radar, so you don't have to worry about that, I suppose. But even without that, it's kind of wild how much junk there is up there. So realistically, flying the aircraft manually and trying to take that position, I don't think is a terribly practical thing to do. Like, I've done it. I've been able to kill some targets like that. Instantly, I got a missile fired at me there. No warning. That was actually a laser-guided ATGM that came my way. So it's just, I've found that it's more effective to just fly it from the back seat and let the bot do its thing in the gunner seat, even though he is a little bit finicky at the moment. I expect that'll improve with time. I have heard the fire control radar does allow you to fire from the back seat, but as I said, we don't have that, and I'm not an Apache expert, so may or may not be true. I don't know. I'm not the person to ask. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm not sure what else to say. Oh, I should touch on performance. You can see here I'm getting 68 frames per second, 73. This is at 1440p in pancake mode. In VR, I get less than half this, so I get like 25, 30 FPS. For comparison, with either the Hind or the KA-50, I'm getting 60 plus in VR, which would equate to about 120, 140 FPS here. The exact same mission. This is after the patch. I've done a direct comparison. The Apache is an absolute resource hog that runs at about half the frame rate of any other aircraft in DCS, including very new ones. That may be an optimization issue. I have noticed there seems to be some kind of memory leak, because even after I'll exit a mission, I'll suddenly get stutters and like be at 40 FPS in the main menu, as opposed to like 5,000 FPS. So there's clearly something going on there. There's some kind of bug. But even before that bug takes hold, it's still pretty stuttery. Hopefully the RTX 4080 won't be ridiculously priced, or the RTX, I don't know, 7900 XT maybe? 8900, whatever they're on now. This generation's been impossible to get, so I haven't really paid much attention. But yeah, hopefully this winter we'll be able to get a graphics card that can actually run this in the reasonable way in VR. By the way, I was using VR in this track. I'm just recording it at 1440. And I did not actually crash there, so I guess, yeah, I guess tracks are still broken, because that was not crash. I crashed later in the mission, but not there. So, yeah, those are my initial thoughts on it. It is a fun aircraft. It's a nice addition, and I think once it's fully fleshed out, it'll be a really good attack helicopter, but I don't think it's going to be as dominant as people thought it would be. I think even after it's completely fleshed out, a case could be made that the KA-50 is still superior. And that's without accounting for the additions that Black Shark 3 may or may not bring about, if and when that ever happens. It is better than the Hind in the attack helicopter role, of course. And one could argue it's better than the Hind even in its current state. But I do have to say I miss the speed of the Hind and the Hokum with it. It is a slow helicopter. It's like flying a Huey. You're not going to get anywhere in a hurry, and basically everyone's going to outrun you. But yeah, it mostly works. There's some bugs to work on. A lot of features that need to be added, but I'm generally pretty happy with it. That's it for this video. I may come back later with a startup video. We'll see. Yeah, you just have to wait and see if I'm in the mood to make it. See you in the next video, whenever that is.